In the summer of 2012, a U.S. Coast Guard aircraft is flying search patterns over open water between Key West and Fort Myers, Florida, looking for a body that was supposedly thrown from a high-speed ferry somewhere along that route. The search runs for weeks. It costs the government nearly $200,000, and it finds absolutely nothing because the man they're looking for was never in the water at all. This is the story of Aubrey Lee Price, a church minister and investment banker who ran one of the more audacious Ponzi schemes in recent American history, wiped out a federally insured bank in the process, faked his own suicide to escape it, and spent the next 18 months as an actual fugitive before something as mundane as renewing a truck registration finally brought the whole thing crashing down. Rewind to the mid-2000s. Aubrey's around 41, living in Georgia, and wearing two respected hats at once. He's a minister at a local church and, separately, an investment banker. In 2008, he decides he's done working for other people and starts his own investment firm. And instead of building a client base the ordinary way, he goes straight to the people who already trust him unconditionally, his own congregation. He gives sermons and seminars about being a smart Christian investor, tells church members and close friends they can trust him with their money, and they do. Some hand over their retirement savings. Before long, roughly $37 million is sitting in accounts under Aubrey's control. Then he starts gambling with it, not investing carefully, actual high-risk day trading, pouring huge sums into increasingly aggressive bets. Instead of the returns he'd promised, the money starts disappearing by the millions. And rather than come clean, Aubrey does what a lot of people running exactly this kind of scheme end up doing. He falsifies the records, fabricates statements showing incredible returns, and uses that fiction to raise even more money, another roughly $14 million. With some of that new money, he buys controlling shares in a small Georgia bank, Montgomery Bank and Trust, in the town of Ailey. Then he takes $21 million directly out of that federally insured bank, real depositors' money, not just his investors, and uses it partly to pay back earlier investors and partly to keep gambling in the market. He loses that too. By 2012, the total damage sits at more than $70 million, and the fallout is bigger than just angry investors. Montgomery Bank and Trust actually collapses because of what he did to it. By this point, his clients are asking for payouts he simply doesn't have, and Aubrey knows exposure is only a matter of time. He could confess. Instead, he decides to disappear entirely. In June 2012, he writes a long, rambling letter, more than 20 pages by some accounts, to his investors and to his own wife and kids, admitting he lost their money and describing himself as overwhelmed with guilt and depression, planning to take a high-speed ferry out from Key West and jump overboard somewhere along the route to Fort Myers when no one's looking. He buys dive weights beforehand, apparently to help sell the story. He actually boards that ferry. There's ticket and surveillance footage confirming it, so there's a real, public paper trail placing him exactly where his suicide story needs him to be. He never jumps. He quietly gets off when the ferry docks in Fort Myers, and from there makes his way south, eventually crossing into Mexico on foot, then working his way further down through Central and South America by bus. He grows out his hair and beard, adopts a new identity, and gets by however he can, including stretches of manual labor on farms. Back home, his suicide letter works exactly as intended. The Coast Guard search turns up nothing, which everyone reasonably takes as confirmation rather than a red flag. His parents, his wife, his kids, none of them were told the real plan, so all of them genuinely believe he's dead. Eventually, his wife files the paperwork and a Florida judge officially declares him deceased, which triggers its own kind of disaster back home. Since he'd already admitted to fraud, federal authorities freeze what assets remain, and his wife and 3 teenage kids are left with essentially nothing. His own children end up taking jobs to help cover food and rent for a family that has just lost, in their minds, both a father and a provider, not knowing he's very much alive. The FBI, notably, never buys the suicide story for a second. Their reasoning is almost embarrassingly simple. There's no body. Men running exactly this kind of financial collapse have faked their deaths before, and agents keep the case open, eventually offering a $20,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. South of the border, based mostly on Aubrey's own later retelling worth taking with real skepticism, he claims stretches of work as a bagman and drug runner for a Latin American trafficking operation, and even describes, in a later jailhouse interview, walking into a room and finding 30 or 40 workers bagging cocaine for an operation he says he ended up tangled up in. He's also claimed periods as an underground cage fighter and, by his own account, working as a bodyguard for prostitutes. None of that is independently verified. He's a convicted con man telling his own story from a jail cell, so take it exactly as seriously as that deserves. By 2013, broke and worn down from a year and a half of manual labor and life on the run, Aubrey decides to come back into the United States. He crosses back into Florida, settles into a rented trailer in a quiet area near Citra, and sets up an indoor marijuana grow operation over 200 plants, selling in bulk to cover rent and bills. For a while, it actually works. It's starting to look like a man who stole more than $70 million and faked his own death might genuinely get away with both. What ends it isn't clever police work. It's a truck registration. Aubrey's truck is still registered in Georgia, and rather than re-register it in Florida, which might draw exactly the kind of attention he can't afford, he decides to just drive back up to Georgia to renew the tags in person. On New Year's Eve 2013, a Glynn County deputy pulls him over on Interstate 95 near Brunswick, Georgia, for windows tinted darker than the law allows. Nothing sophisticated. A routine stop. The kind that happens to thousands of drivers every year. The deputy notices Aubrey is unusually nervous for a simple tint violation, has him step out, and searches him, finding a second ID with a completely different name on it. That alone is enough to arrest him on the spot, well before anyone realizes exactly who they've actually caught. Once he's in custody, Aubrey doesn't fight it. He confesses to essentially everything before investigators have even fully pieced it together themselves. The fraud, the bank, the fake death, all of it. Apparently exhausted from 18 months of maintaining an entire second identity. He's ultimately convicted and takes a plea deal, sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, plus 5 years of supervised release afterward. If stories like this, where the getaway holds up for over a year and then falls apart over something this small, keep pulling you in, subscribe, because there's always another one.